Franca. Welcome to the lockdown sessions again.
Again, yes, it's good to be back.
To our three listeners. No, actually, I saw the other day 78 listeners.
Yes, excellent.
It's a good start.
That's a good start. Whether or not whatever we talked about made sense to them is a different matter, but
completely.
That's
either way, if 78 people want to download it, that's
yeah.
absolutely fine with me. So welcome back, executive coach, learning and leadership consultant. And when we talked last time, we really were unpicking some of the kind of early learnings from the lockdown. And now when we come together, as we approach kind of summer holidays in Europe and Europe kind of either shutting down again.
Yep.
I'm interested to pick the conversation up again and almost dive straight in, because you were saying last time how leaders need to kind of wake up to this new landscape and speak up and stand up and encourage their people to. So in the 4 or 5 weeks since we were last together, observations from your end, what have you been noticing?
Yes, so I was kind of trying to cast my mind back to our conversation without listening to the podcast in a way, because I didn't want to be swayed by what I said.
Yeah, okay. Nice.
But also there's a risk of repeating myself, which I'm going to try not to.
I'll edit that out.
Yeah,
if you do.
yeah, great. I think there is there is a kind of an ongoing theme there from the conversations I've been having, either as part of what next for organizations and org design, for example, the need for certainty in this kind of uncertain world. Another one is around kind of different ways of working. So all those themes are ongoing, as well as the theme of diversity and inclusion. And if on that last one thing I've noticed was the amount of D&I roles that are emerging on job boards. It's skyrocketing. I've been contacted by ironic organization in US. They say, hey, you've got an interesting background, can we talk? So I'll keep you posted on how that conversation goes.
Yeah.
But there seems to be a trend on that. Without kind of going too deep into the topic, because that could be a conversation in itself.
Episode 3.
Yeah. Episode 3 is the same thing that happened with a few years ago when the UK, for example, created the whole gender pay gap movement. There was a lot of calls for D&I initiatives and D&I roles and all of that, and it kind of fizzled out. So there was this initial flurry of action, and it kind of died off. And I wonder if the same is happening again. So the question I have is, if you're going to invest in D&I and D&I roles, and do it for a reason, with a purpose, and kind of fine, you've woken up to the issue, great, you're standing up. Now, make sure it's not just, you're not just doing it to tick a box, and it's not just a PR exercise. Otherwise, you're going to keep doing it time and time and time again, and people are going to lose trust and faith in what you're trying to do.
There is a feeling, I suppose, there's always that risk that when you create a movement, you need to create momentum.
Yeah.
And we saw it, didn't we, with BLM here in the UK. The momentum dissipated after 3 or 4 weeks, and people moved on to their next hashtag, and the core remained still pushing. But then you start to get the naysayers and people challenging it. In the States, 40 days later, they're still,
still going,
driving. And I think with D&I, what I notice is it's part of this momentum that actually the landscape of the world has changed.
Yeah.
We are trying, I feel, I don't know if we're successful at it, but we're trying to recognize that inclusivity from leadership right down to actually the bottom rung of the corporate ladder, if you can't be inclusive in your approach, you're almost not going to fit the culture.
Yeah.
And perhaps the only area where that doesn't land is in the world of male professional footballer, where for some reason there seems no D&I relevancy, because even though it's impossible to believe that there isn't that kind of fluidity in gender, in sexuality, there are no openly gay professional footballers, for example, which just is madness when you say it out loud. So D&I hasn't quite reached the world of pro football here in the UK.
Which is sad, because they have the platform. They have the platform to really make a difference.
But what does it tell you about the people who play the game, who run the game, and who support the game? That as a player, I don't feel comfortable enough to say, hey, by the way, I might be gay.
Yeah.
What do you feel about that? And it's as if we're living in the 1960s and 70s for football. But I'm interested in this D&I piece and this momentum, because in your experience, if people do go down this route, do they need to change the way they operate to be more inclusive in their approach? It doesn't come naturally to people, does it?
No, it's a tough one, and I've had lots of these conversations in previous organizations where I've been. I said, for me, it's not about diversity, because there's a lot of diversity around, physical and non-physical diversity. So you can look at someone, you see the skin color, the different color. And for those of you who say, I don't see color, well, hello. I have no comment for that. So there is the physical and non-physical diversity that's there. For me, it's about kind of inclusion, and how do we include everyone? And by everyone is the quiet voices sometimes, because usually when I've worked in groups of same nationality, same race and color, where those issues of inclusion were present. And it was nothing to do, because they were all the same, the same race, same nationality. But the issues of power in the room, status, all of that comes in. So it's about kind of how do you bring that? I think now it's, if you're looking at maybe kind of some organizations where you look at the profile of the exec team, for example, and they're all white middle-aged men, you should also be kind of going, hang on, from an inclusion point of view, are we really being inclusive here? And it's very easy for a lot of those boards to say, well, but we have X% of our workforce that's BAME. But are they represented across all levels of the organization? Because the same issue came up with the gender pay gap. There's a lot of women in the workforce. In fact, the world population, there's more women than men. Right. There's a lot of women in the workforce that, but they are not represented at all levels. And you might find a lot of non-white workforce as well in some organizations, but again, they're not represented at all levels. So from an inclusion point of view, what's stopping that? Yeah,
you're right. We have diversity by the nature of our existence. What we don't have is inclusion.
Inclusion, yeah.
In fact, there were two reports today on my news app. One was in the US, one was here in the UK. So the Football Association here in the UK, the 50-year-old plus male board rejected the opportunity to discuss bringing women into the boardroom on the FA. They rejected it completely.
Yeah. I saw that one as well, yeah.
And in the US, you had, the William Barr, the Supreme Court guy from the Department of Justice, being interviewed. and he was called out for having systemic racism in his organization because he has no people of color working in his team. And the board, the judges who were interviewing him and questioning him, when they asked him, do you believe there's systemic racism? He said, no, of course not. And they said, well, I'm afraid your actions speak louder than words, Mr. Barr. You've got no people of color in any part of your organization. So that is systemic racism. So you're right. So how do I go, if I'm a leader in an organization, how do I shift to being more inclusive, really like valuing this diversity that you're referencing here?
That's a $1 million question, and I don't think there is in the work that it's a really good question to ask, but because there isn't, as you and I know, there isn't a silver bullet, as it were, that's going to sort that. I've recently been part of some really interesting conversations around race, racism, and as it relates to the work that we do. So it was an initiative by the Organizational Development Network Europe and the NTL Institute about bringing practitioners together to talk about issues of race and racism, and how we as practitioners, coaches, L&Ders or leaders, how can we do better work on ourselves and deal with our own issues, as well as help others deal with that. It's been it's almost like T group work. So it's been quite deep and emotional over Zoom. And people are on different spectrums of the conversation, I guess. And I've just come off a previous call talking about the same. So it's kind of still fresh in my mind. And for me, there was a presentation the other day by a lady called Tracy who works at the NHS Leadership Academy. And she says, we need to shift the way we think about this when we look at leadership development, because for leaders to kind of really do meaningful work on D&I, they need to be connected emotionally. And so there's an issue between emotion and relationships. So they need to be emotionally involved and connected to the topic, and there needs to be some relationship there at all, because if there isn't, it's just going to be another tick box exercise. And that really got me thinking from a reflection point of view, because by nature I consider myself different. I'm Portuguese. I live in the UK. I've got a different name. Everyone thinks I'm Spanish. I'm not. I've got this accent. And there's more diversity layers to me as well. Yeah. So I automatically see myself as different. I'm not part of the norm here. I'm part of the norm back home, but not here. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I notice difference a bit more, and I call it out. And also having done lots of work in the Middle East and South Africa and Kazakhstan and places like that, I've been exposed to a lot of the local diversity. So I notice when I was majority and minority and so on. So it's easier for me to kind of spot that, but because I'm emotionally connected with it, right, I can call it out. So how can we help leaders connect themselves emotionally with the issue around racism, especially if they're, as we're saying, the white middle-aged men running the FA? How can they connect more emotionally with having females in the organization? Surely a lot of them are married. They've got wives and daughters, I'm sure. Can they not connect emotionally with that? So how can we work with leaders to connect more emotionally with these issues? Because if they really believe in them, if they're passionate about it, they will whatever initiatives they put in place will make a difference. But I wonder if they need a lot more time to talk about those topics. I'm not suggesting counseling or therapy of any way, shape, or form, but just the space for them to think and reflect how they connect emotionally to those.
I know some very good therapists.
Yeah.
I'll put out a little like business card at the bottom of the YouTube channel in case people want the therapy. I like the fact that the way you frame that, you know, it's about having an emotional connection, an emotional relationship with it. But you have to be self-aware to have that. You have to be almost clinical in recognizing how you operate. You need to know what your bias is. And I suppose for me, what springs up when I'm listening to you is then we have to overcome all this unconscious bias that exists within all of us, wherever you're from. And that bias exists in all communities, in anybody who says, oh, I'm never biased. It's like as soon as you say never,
Yep.
I call you out. I call out BS because that's just not true. We might not want to admit it. And I suppose when I hear inclusivity, for me as a leader, I'm thinking about how do I value the contribution of everybody in my team.
Yeah.
And that's not that difficult to do. That's just about, you know, listening, shutting up every now and then, and encouraging people to own their own space.
Yeah.
Is there more to it, or maybe I'm simplifying it through my own naivety?
I think you're right, and I agree with you, because that's a lot of the work that we do is very much about getting leaders to understand the different skill sets and different passions and motivations in the individuals in the team, kind of playing to their strengths. You know, there's even tools out there that measure your team's strength. So as a leader, you should know that. I think there's a level beyond where they can go, and I think from a D&I point of view, they even though I said D&I would be the next topic, I think it's all interrelated somehow. I think they can do more, because they if, for example, you're selling a product or a service, and a lot of your target audience is, let's say, BAME, and if the team running the project is all white, for example, as a leader, have you really included all the different viewpoints and experiences as part of your team that could help, you know, make the product or service more effective? And I think there's a missing trick there, where they could look at inclusion at a different level, I guess, to bring different perspectives into that.
And then there's another question for you then, because part of me wonders, is this a generational problem? We were having dinner the other night, and my daughter's gone up to Newcastle for a week to see her friends. And we were talking about Beyonce and Kanye West and behaviors and what looks like racism to one isn't to another. It was a really interesting conversation. And I notice in her and her friends, her generation, there's an inclusivity that is much more natural than in our generation. Yeah. And she was telling me that, you know, there are these new phrases. So when Black and Jewish people come together, they're called bluish. And she used this phrase, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And she's showing me on Google, Blasian. when Black and Asian comes in. And it's as if maybe that younger generation, they've grown up with trans, LGBTQ+, and perhaps inclusivity is only a problem for that generation who are kind of 35 and upwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's you know, once these generations pass through the corporate world, in 20 years' time, we won't even be having these chats. Inclusivity will just be the norm.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally. I'm so with you and you, Doctor, on that one. And I've said that to a few people, and they said, well, no, but we all get you know, it's a bit like when babies that you could teach them any language when in the first 2 years.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've watched the documentary on Channel 4. If you listen to this and you live outside of the UK, I don't know how you could access it, but it's called The School Who Tried to End Racism.
Oh no, I've not seen it.
It's really powerful. So they go into a school in South London, and they know that there's research done that kids only start developing racist behaviors or tendencies after being conditioned by society and parents and communities and so on after a certain age, so usually 13 plus. So they brought 17 to 13-year-olds together, and they separated into affinity groups, so the white versus non-white, to have those conversations, and then brought them together. It was really, really interesting because to start with, the kids, they didn't think that they were racist, neither side, even though non-whites had experienced racism and they talk openly about it. So it's quite a powerful documentary, and I definitely recommend watching it. But I think because kids are growing up now in a way where, and again, I'm mindful, I'm in the London bubble, where cultural diversity is the norm. Last weekend, I went somewhere else in the country where I didn't see a single person of color, and that disturbed me in a way. So I was kind of going, oh, but you live in the London bubble, so of course I'm used to seeing it every day. So kids grow up now, especially in London. You know, it's part of the it's part of their life to have friends of different nationalities, different races, different colors. It's the way it is. So they don't. For them, it's kind of normal. It's the new normal, and the same as you said with the LGBTQ plus, trans, and all of that. It's part of the norm. Just because it's part of the norm, I wouldn't want them to take it for granted. I would, when they go into the organizations and through the careers, I want them to realize that because it's the norm now, it hasn't always been the norm. So never stop fighting.
And it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I remember last summer, I was out walking my dogs, and I bumped into someone in my village, and she identifies as trans, and she is full of piercings, which suit her, by the way, but she's got, you know, one of those big holes that stretches her ear, between her nose, in her tongue, on her lips. She's totally, you know, powered up her face with piercings. And I'm sure when she's showing me pictures of, you know, when she's going out, when they are going out and identifies as they, looks fabulous, like really sharp. But they were arguing with me to say that when they go for interviews, because they were just graduating from an English degree, no one takes them seriously. And I said to them, look, if you were coming to my organization for an interview, I'm not saying no to you because you're trans. I'm saying no to you because you can't stand up in front of my clients and dress like that. Because in spite of the inclusivity, my clients want someone who looks a little less extreme. How do we move to a point where those extremes are less extreme, because here's someone who got a first from a very prominent university in the UK and can't find a job in the corporate market and doesn't feel they should have to dress themselves down in order to conform with what the corporate would have them wear, which is maybe a suit or a smart jacket with trousers. And I didn't have an answer for them.
Yeah. You see, that's I've had those many conversations with people in the past as well, and I think in the same way that you join an organization and you can't be what you can see. Mm-hmm. So if you join an organization and it's all senior white men and you're the only non-white person in the organization, you're going to go, hey, in this place, it's obvious I'll never get progression. I'll never be able to progress. I think there's something interesting happening right now, and you probably have heard a lot of this about kind of organization and consultancies talking about purpose-driven organizations. And my last organization, they published the trust report, and trust and purpose was really poignant, because to the point that even your employees can turn against you, because if your purpose is not connected with social issues. And we've seen the same, we've seen walkouts at Google, at Amazon, in fact, still ongoing, Amazon France, for example. So I believe there's going to be more of that happening.
Yes, the Google was about those email exchanges, wasn't it? People just walked out.
Yeah, and not enough women and so on. So and the same is going to start happening with racial issues, because we thought that, racism was, well, we thought that racism wasn't an issue until everyone's talking about it again. I'm kind of going, why are we still talking about it? Of course it's an issue. Of course it's always been there. We don't need those we just don't want those incidents to trigger a reaction and no action. Otherwise it's going to come up in a few years' time.
But Joseph, then it instantly puts me on notice, because I consider myself educated and rounded, and yet even in this conversation, I feel a little cautious about the language I use, because it may not be the right language, or I may say something that exposes my complete ignorance on the topic. Did I use the right pronoun? Am I being non-inclusive? Things don't become a problem till you make them a problem. It's tough, and I fall into that white, middle-aged, I'll be 50 this year, gray hair. Yeah, am I just that person that I despise when we're talking?
Yeah, and you're right. And language is an issue. Language is a massive issue. So a lot of the conversations, it comes up in the documentary I told you about, but it also came up in the conversations I've been having as part of the OD&E and NTL group, is that sometimes we don't have the language, or there's this fear of that we might say something that will offend other people, and could be to do with our unconscious biases that are in there, or social conditioning, or upbringing, and all of that. So I think there is definitely something around language, that we don't always have the language. And I think it's okay to say, you know what, I don't know how to have this conversation. I don't know how to bring the issue of racism with someone else, or which pronouns to use with someone who doesn't want to be referred as either gender. So I think there is an issue of language there. And I think for me, it's about kind of saying, hey, you know what, I don't know. Let's talk about it. Let's explore it. Let's not, and knowing that you're not going to get a concrete answer, a silver bullet. You're not going to solve the issue, because these are complex issues that you just can solve.
Well, maybe there's this goes back to your inclusivity piece, because actually, as long as I have that open mind, so this individual who refers as they were telling me they went for an interview in London with a major consulting firm, and asked the reception for directions to the bathroom. And we're told to head to the elevators, and to the left of the elevators, they'll find the bathrooms. This person, although identifying as they, views himself more in the male side of that, and walked directly into the male bathroom. But presents, when you look at them, with bias, you would say female, and was asked by security to use the right bathroom. Well, they gave feedback to the interviewer on this, to say you need to educate everybody in your building over these issues, and not just have posters on the wall saying that at lunch on Thursday you can go to an LGBTQ plus session. And it's, inclusivity is about really recognizing what people are thinking, what people are feeling. But at the same time, we live in this cancel culture now, don't we? So I could have said something 5 years ago and people want to cancel me for it now.
Yeah, well, we could both be cancelled after this conversation today. we don't. That's the thing. And I think there's two things with the cancel culture. There is one where you can make a mistake and you can say something out of context. A lot of it is taken out of context, and you get people on the two sides kind of going, well, they shouldn't have said that. Others saying, you know what, have you never made a mistake? So I think there's judgment by social media. I think, and for all the goods of social media, it's got a lot to answer for, and not just on the cancel culture, but so many things.
Just ask Wiley.
Yeah, just exactly. Yeah. The other thing with the inclusion piece is that, and I said earlier, you could have, if you're not emotionally connected or invested in it, you are going to do a tick box exercise. You are going to say you've got all these affinity groups in your organization that, in my opinion, create more division than inclusion. You're going to have all these policies and all the right training and all of that, but then you miss the one crucial thing, which is the toilet issue.
Right.
So are you really emotionally connected? So are you really being inclusive? And I think we need to. I don't know the answer to the question of should we judge people based on their appearances, because I've taken a stance about saying, you know what, I'm not going to wear a suit and tie. A few years ago, I decided I'm not going to wear a suit and tie. I said I'm going to be smart cash. If you're not going to hire me because I'm not wearing a suit, that's your loss, not mine.
Right, you don't want to.
And I made that point with an organization, and they go, "That's a fair point." Right. And then, of course, lately I worked in the more creative industries, but even in oil and gas, which is very corporate, I never wore a suit and tie because it just wasn't part of the thing. And now, people are at home making calls in the pajamas, shorts, and all of that. And these are senior leaders doing that.
I know I won't stand up, but I'm wearing my shorts and trainers right now.
Yeah, likewise. So there is, so to what, how does it detract you from being the professional, the expert, the leader that you are? And if leaders condition their employees to look and feel like robots, can they really be themselves in the workplaces we were talking last time? But also, if you're not going to hire someone because they identify as they versus he or she, or if because they've got piercings or tattoos, so hang on, these aren't just your employees; these are your clients. And sometimes a lot of organizations don't realize that. And I remember going for an interview a few years back with a brand that I absolutely loved. And when one of the interviewers asked me, why us? And I said, well, I actually love your products. I think they're great. The experience every time I go into one of your shops is amazing. And in fact, I've got X amount of them at home. And one of the individuals turns to me and goes, I'm sure you have. With that tone, not just great, well, versus another organization that I went in the same period of time, where the interviewer immediately recognized I was wearing one of their perfumes.
Right.
And the two experiences couldn't have been more different.
Yeah.
One, I didn't get the role, but engaged with me, connected with me on LinkedIn, we stayed in touch. The other one, I actually stopped buying the products.
Right, because of the experience.
Because of the experience. So, you know, I'm not just your employee, I'm your customer as well. Yeah. So, and that's why I was going back to that point earlier. So if, as a leader, yeah, we train you to be inclusive, you know, all leadership models pretty much ask you to be an inclusive leader.
Yeah.
But if you're a leader of an organization that is marketing a service or a product for the wider community and society out there, if you don't include employees or advisors or people from those communities, are you really being inclusive? And because if not, you're just imposing your own way, and maybe that's not the right answer either. But and I wonder if there needs to be a massive shift, and hopefully COVID will help with that, of all this kind of, and I've worked in HR, I know all these policies, dress like this, do that. And I saw a post by someone that I've known a few years ago that said, you know, 15 years ago, I was going to the US to convince the CEO that people could wear jeans in the office. Now, overnight, I don't need to fly anywhere. It's the norm.
Yeah, I can wear my pajamas.
So hopefully that's going to be the case. And it's the same with, look at the airline industry. You can't have any visible piercings, tattoos, and any of that. Look at the passengers. Are cabin crew really a representation of the customers they're serving?
Right.
Well, maybe
some biased image of what they should look like.
Yes, maybe for the first class passengers, but let's face it, it's only 20 seats, and right now, not even that.
Oh, for sure.
So it's the majority image to please a few. So I think we need to get over the fact that you need to look a certain way, and maybe start asking the question: if the client doesn't want someone looking like that to be their coach or their advisor or their mentor, should we be doing work with them at all?
Well, I know that from a values point of view, if I don't align on values with a client, I don't work with them.
Yeah.
And I remember years ago working with actually one of your former employers, and it was with one of their gaming divisions down in Brighton.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the executive board. They're doing like a 2-day presenting with presence workshop. So I said to the account manager who'd booked the day, hey, listen, what's the dress code for this workshop? And they're like, oh, Brad, it's directors, suits and boots. And I thought about it, and I called him back and I went, Simon, are you sure this is a gaming division in Brighton of a creative media company? Are you sure? Yes, suits and boots. So I drove down to Brighton, and my grandma was living there at the time. So I parked up outside her flat, and I drove down. When I drive in shorts. I'm always in shorts, Jose. So I drive down in my shorts and my trainers, and I pop inside to her flat, say good morning to her, have some cereal with her. I get changed into my suit, shirt, double cuffs, some nice cufflinks, no tie like you, I don't wear a tie. And I walk into the office. Well, the first person who walked into the room was the finance director. And he came in combat shorts, sandals, and a t-shirt showing the cast of Coronation Street. Well, I almost threw up in my throat, because as the next 5 directors walked in, they were all in combat fatigues, shorts, Bahama shirts, you know, like Hawaiian shirts, not Bahamas, you know, like the big Hawaiian brash. Well, when we got to like just before the first break and we were talking about mirroring your audience in order to have an impact, they were like, who told you to come in a suit, Brad? And literally, Jose, at the break, I ran to my car, I got out of my suit, I put my shorts on and trainers, and I ran the rest of the workshop in my shorts.
Yeah.
And so just at that level, and that was maybe 10 or 12 years ago that happened. Today, people are so savvy, it almost feels as though leaders need to just stop and ask the question, what's going on in my landscape? Internally, externally, and then they have to care enough to make the effort to understand and learn how they need to start framing things. And to me, that seems as though that's maybe the leadership challenge in this particular space, is to care enough to want to see how they can be more inclusive.
Yeah, if they're not emotionally connected with it, and if there's no way they're gonna care. So if they really are passionate about their non-white workforce, they will do something meaningful about it.
Right.
They will not just put some PR tweet or saying, we all care. A bit like we saw during the lockdown, all these corporates on TV ads about COVID, we care, and all of that. It's interesting how they've gone. We were talking about it last night, how they've gone from caring about you a few months ago, we're all in this together, to now trying to sell you the products without saying, hey, we see you back, let's have you again. So it's going beyond that kind of PR exercise, and maybe our role is kind of work with those leaders to kind of create the space for them to have those conversations with themselves.
Right. Yeah, I think that's where the coach really can come in and be valuable for them.
Yeah, because they're as we discussed last time, we don't want them to go back to the way they were.
No. So
it's about kind of waking up, standing up, and taking a stand and acting. So and what's happening right now is that there's this kind of there's a lot of anxiety in leaders right now, because anxiety kind of wanting to make the right decisions, saying the right things, and maybe they need space to process all of that.
Yeah, and that is where, as coaches, I think we can help. To create that safe space, whilst at the same time, for myself anyway, is to really be learning through those conversations how I can adapt and change and flex from my own biases. This is one of those fascinating conversations that we could probably turn into the next 3 hours. Jose, I need to invite you back again, I think, to pick this up further. Maybe we do like a D&I part 2. To see, because I feel as though there's so much more on it, and I feel as though I need to educate myself even more, and not just rely on my daughter to teach me the ways of the world. Her lens is probably more narrow as a 19-year-old.
Yeah, but those lived experiences, from a racial point of view, but also from your teenage daughter, listen to those lived experiences, because that's the lived experience that's just as important as our upbringing and education. So it's about kind of balancing those.
Well, and maybe as a final point, she said something really interesting, because in her social network, people don't come out anymore. They don't even feel the need to identify. They just are. And I said, because in my day it was a big deal if you were coming out. It's like, no, people don't. They don't feel the need to. It's just, we live inclusively. It doesn't matter who, what, or where, or why, or how you get on with your life. We just accept. And I think there's hope when I look in the future. I think it's for those kind of maybe the generation just before the millennials that needs to do a lot more work to bring us to a place that feels totally inclusive.
Yeah. And my invite to the current generation is, don't stay complacent. Don't take it for granted just because it's the way it is. It's normal, because it's not long ago that the Stonewall riots happened, and it's only a few weeks ago that we had the Black Lives Matter protests and riots. So never take it for granted. Never stay complacent. Keep the fight going, be that about racism, sexuality, gender, climate change, because I believe that as a society we got complacent on so many things.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting as well. I was watching a Simon Sinek video the other day. He made a really interesting point about climate change. He said we've given it the wrong name.
Yeah.
We call it global warming, and people think, well, the world isn't warming when the weather's really like rain or it's cold. Yeah. He says we should have called it global cancer.
Yeah.
And then everybody would have taken note.
Yeah.
And it's that language association, and maybe that's also part of this inclusivity, is we want to really use the right words to make people feel psychologically safe, to feel included. And then be the best version of themselves, because that's all we care about. From my own leadership point of view, I want my team to be the best version of themselves. Yeah. I don't actually care what they subscribe to, except their values base.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, Jose, fascinating. What a great conversation.
Yes. So not what we intended to talk about, but it went where the energy was.
Yeah, I like that. We'll come back again in another month, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah.
Jose, Franca, thank you so much for being part of Lockdown, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, pleasure as always. Thank you.
Love it.